In my last video, we started on this topic, so today we're here to finish it. Basically, with the offseason right around the corner, every team enters the period with a plan, but executing on those plans is sometimes easier said than done. I'm here to go through every single NBA team, discussing the worst case scenarios that could realistically happen to them this offseason, which would be a complete nightmare from their perspective goals. In my last video, I went through all of the teams in the Eastern Conference, so be sure to go watch that video if you missed it, but that means that today we'll be going through all of the teams in the Western Conference to finish things off. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going in alphabetical order, we'll be starting with the Dallas Mavericks, and their worst case scenario offseason would be if Kyrie Irving were to leave in free agency. The Mavericks gave up some pretty valuable assets in order to acquire Kyrie Irving, and after missing the playoffs entirely with him this season, then the deal could go down as one of the worst in recent history if he were to leave immediately after. The Mavericks would have money to spend to replace him, but this isn't necessarily a star-studded free agency class like we've seen other years, so options are scarce. This would result in Luka Doncic getting even more frustrated with the franchise, not being able to build a winner around him, and that's the last thing that they want to do. Next up is the Denver Nuggets, and their worst case scenario offseason is losing their bench to free agency. The Nuggets have their starting lineup locked up for a few more years, and with them in the driver's seat in the NBA Finals, that's already a good enough thing for a contender, but they are currently playing just an 8-man rotation, and 2 of the 3 bench players that they play are free agents, being Bruce Brown and Jeff Green. They're also already very low on cap space, so signing impactful depth will be difficult, and Bruce Brown especially will be valued highly on the open market by other teams. Next is the Golden State Warriors, and their nightmare offseason would be if Draymond Green were to leave in free agency. Coach Steve Kerr said in a recent interview that, quote, "If Draymond's not back, we're not a championship contender," end quote. And honestly, he's spot on. Draymond is very controversial in the NBA world, but his impact defensively and his ability to orchestrate the free-flowing offense that they run has been integral to their dynasty, and if he leaves, then that could mark the beginning of the end for them. Next is the Houston Rockets, and their worst case scenario offseason is going down a path that stunts their young core's growth. By this, I mean that the James Harden rumors are obviously there, and if Harden comes, then the team may get rash and make middling moves to fill out the roster with hypothetical win-now guys. Putting the development of their young guys aside in the name of maybe sneaking into the playoffs would be a big mistake, and all it would do is stunt not only their short-term success, but the long-term success as well. Up next is the Los Angeles Clippers, and their worst-case scenario is not being able to find a point guard. The Clippers have tried several different names out at point guard over the last few years, and it still remains their biggest weakness. From Reggie Jackson, to John Wall, to Russell Westbrook, they've had some names people were hopeful about, but now they're in a spot where they have virtually no money to spend and no standout point guard on the roster. The Clippers at full strength are obviously a team capable of making noise, but it feels like we have this conversation with them every summer. Next up is the Los Angeles Lakers, and their nightmare offseason would be if LeBron James were to retire. To be completely honest, I don't think this is actually going to happen, but when LeBron finishes off his press conference with the fact that he has a lot to think about regarding his future playing in the NBA, it obviously becomes one of the options on the table. LeBron retiring would put the Lakers in a really weird spot, where they would have to essentially start over building their roster with only Anthony Davis as a starting point, as he's really the only guy left still under contract going into the next season. Next is the Memphis Grizzlies, and their worst case scenario offseason would be if Ja Morant gets a hefty suspension. This seems to be the writing on the wall based on what Adam Silver has been saying in recent interviews, but just how long the suspension is could be detrimental. Morant was suspended for a few games this season earlier for a similar incident, but now that it's a repeat offense, there's concern that he may be forced to miss either half of the season or more. If that's the case, then a lot of the progress that the Grizzlies have made over the past few seasons would be halted entirely. Next is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and their worst case scenario this offseason is running it back with what they have. I'm not necessarily saying that they need to make a drastic change to the team, but after the season they just had, they need to try something different. Trading for Rudy Gobert was supposed to be their all-in move, and it didn't even make them a better team, so now they're in a weird spot where they're stuck in the middle of the pack with what they currently have. Next is the New Orleans Pelicans, and their nightmare offseason would be if Zion Williamson suffers yet another setback. Zion Williamson's NBA career has been marred by injuries, which is a shame because when he's been on the court, he's actually shown some truly elite potential. There is truly nothing more important to the Pelicans franchise than him having a summer full of healthiness and successful rehab so he can be in shape for the start of the season and finally start to put the question marks behind him. Up next is the Oklahoma City Thunder, and their worst case scenario offseason is if they were to hand out long-term contracts to mediocre role players. The Thunder are rebuilding the right way, prioritizing their youth while also competing hard. Yes, young teams like this need veterans in the locker room to guide them, and the Thunder have available cap space to spend, but that doesn't mean that they need to guarantee long-term deals to these veterans that would limit their flexibility moving forward. Next is the Phoenix Suns, and their worst case scenario would be if they fail to find a viable suitor for DeAndre Ayton in a trade. To put it simply, it's time for the Suns to move on from DeAndre Ayton. He made it clear he didn't even want to be there last summer, they brought him back anyway, and his body language throughout most of the season and in the playoffs this year was just terrible. Bringing him back would, for lack of a better term, be bad vibes, and they're trying to win a championship, so they need to find a team that offers a reasonable package for him to actually get this done, which could be difficult. Up next is the Portland Trail Blazers, and their worst case scenario would be trading their best assets to try to please Damian Lillard, only for the team to marginally improve. This is a huge offseason for the Blazers. They continue to insist that they're trying to win, and rumors have stated that they have made the number 3 pick in the draft this year and Anthony Simons available in trade talks. To make a trade happen, teams may also demand Shaedon Sharpe, and if the Blazers cave and give up their entire future just for one more year of above average play at best, then not only will they end the Lillard era with nothing to show for it, but their future will also be in ruins. Up next is the Sacramento Kings, and their worst case scenario offseason is failing to extend Domantas Sabonis. They traded for Sabonis last season, and this season, the move paid off in a big way as the team ended their playoff drought. He is vital to what the team wants to do moving forward, but he only has 1 year left on his current contract. They need to pay up now so his future is secured, because if they let him hit free agency, then anything can happen and all of their progress could be lost. Next is the San Antonio Spurs, and their nightmare would be if Victor Wembanyama flops. Honestly, the Spurs are in a pretty good spot right now as far as rebuilding teams go, so now the only thing they really need to worry about is Victor Wembanyama's transition to NBA play. He's being touted as one of the best prospects we've ever seen, so they need to make sure that he lives up to that hype. And finally, the last team up is the Utah Jazz, and their worst case scenario is wasting their cap space during a rebuild. Similar to the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Jazz have money to spend this summer, but giving out long-term deals at this point in their team's process just isn't a wise move. Focus on youth, maintain flexibility, and progress forward naturally without rushing things. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think these teams should do this offseason. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.